Good afternoon, everyone. Let me once again thank the Attorney General for being with us today. My name is Sean Landris, and before I get into the introduction, I also serve as the committee chair at JPAC for Fund Development. So these are the high holy days for the Jewish legislative year. Here comes the Yom Kippur appeal. On the back of your program, there is a QR code. It says jpac-cal.org/donate. I encourage everyone who's having a great time, and even everyone who's having an okay time, to visit this QR code to make a contribution to JPAC's 501c4 efforts that make the work all year round and today possible. If you are interested in supporting JPAC's educational work, training the next generation of activists and advocates through our work with college students, raise your hand if you are a college student here today with JPAC. Let's give them all a round of applause. They are learning the ropes here with us, and if you're interested in that, please be in touch directly with David about a 501c3 contribution. But most importantly, let's all show our support for JPAC and the work and the extraordinary turnout and the extraordinary afternoon that we're all about to have. It's my great pleasure to serve on the board of the Jewish Council for Public Affairs with two of our colleagues here in the room today. Kiyomi Kowalski, where are you, Kiyomi? There she is. And Ty Gregory. Ty, where are you? Where's Ty? Okay. But we are part of, I think we're most of the California contingent at the Jewish Council for Public Affairs. And our brand new CEO, who started sometime in full-time in early October of 2023, you know, nothing was happening right around then, has been leading our 8-year-old startup into an extraordinary transformation. And I'm thrilled about the deepening relationship between JCPA and JPAC in the coming years. In fact, we met two legislators last night who, in all likelihood, are fitting out their drapes for Congress next year, Luz Rivas and Laura Friedman. And when they graduate from California, as it were, JCPA on the national scale will be ready to work with them as they make a difference in Congress. Amy is previously served as the Executive Director of Integrity First for America. She sued Nazis and won after Charlottesville. She is a senior advisor on extremism and human rights first on the advisory board of the Polarization and Extremism Research and Innovation Lab at American University and on Bedrock's National Leadership Council. She has extensive experience in government, politics, and advocacy, including as communications director and senior policy advisor to the New York Attorney General and spokesperson and advisor to the New York City Mayor. JCPA is convening Jewish coalitions working across communities to build a just and inclusive American democracy, and I'm thrilled to welcome Amy to the JPAC stage.
Thanks so much, Sean, and I'm grateful to David and JPAC for having me, a lifelong New Yorker, here as an interloper during this California meeting. Perhaps even more so because I'm confusing everyone by meeting a different Jewish organization with the same 4 letters as JCPA, JPAC. We really love our acronyms in the Jewish community. But in all seriousness, JCPA's California and JPAC roots run deep from our decades-long work with the JCRC and local federations and other partners across the state to our 3 incredible board members here today, Sean, Ty, and Kiyomi, as we just want to mention. And I'm really honored to be here with all of you, particularly at this crucial moment for our community. Look, we already knew that anti-Semitism was a crisis before October 7th. increasingly normalized conspiracy theories and tropes, rising hate crimes, a cycle of mass violence targeting Jews and other communities. And after October 7th, we've seen this normalization of anti-Semitism expand and accelerate in new and dangerous ways. It's relatively easy to understand this crisis as a threat to the Jewish community, as a form of religious, racial, or ethnic prejudice that targets us as Jews simply because we're Jews. But what's too often lost in the conversation is that anti-Semitism is also a threat to each and every American and our democratic norms and values. Because unlike other prejudices, anti-Semitism uniquely operates as an overarching conspiracy theory, rooted in lies about Jewish power and influence, painting other communities and institutions as pawns of Jewish control, pitting communities against one another, and sowing distrust in our democracy. And precisely because it functions as a conspiracy theory, anti-Semitism poses a threat far beyond the Jewish community. And as threats to inclusive, pluralistic democracy increase, so too does anti-Semitism flourish. It's systemic, both fueling and fueled by other forms of hate and extremism. The research tells us that those who support political violence are far more likely to believe in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. And similarly, belief in conspiracy theories is among the best predictors of anti-Semitism and the biggest driving motivations for broader extremism. We've seen clearly what this looks like on the right. Neo-Nazis chanting Jews will not replace us in Charlottesville, white supremacist mass shootings in Pittsburgh, Poway, El Paso, Buffalo, and beyond, targeting not just Jews, but also Black, Latino, immigrant, and other communities. Neo-Nazis recruiting in anti-LGBTQ and anti-abortion spaces, and increasingly normalized anti-Semitism from politicians and other voices who use invasion and replacement rhetoric, election denial, or other conspiracy theories to advance anti-democratic, dehumanizing policies and further embolden violent extremists. We also need to be clear-eyed about how these conspiracy theories about Jewish power and control are manifesting right now in more progressive spaces as it relates to Israel. Language about Jewish or Zionist influence, control, and power, efforts to hold the Jewish people collectively responsible for Israel's actions, like my own synagogue that was targeted in October, calls to bar Zionists from certain spaces and institutions, or ban or boycott Zionist authors and musicians, as we've seen over and over again. Make no mistakes, 80 to 90% of American Jews have a relationship with Israel and see it as key to their Jewish identity. So these calls to target and ban Zionists are nothing less than anti-Semitic discrimination and hate, period. All of this is meant to pit Jews against others, to separate us from the very coalitions we need in order to counter broader rising hate and extremism.
Yeah.
And that's why we're seeing extremists of all stripes exploiting the Israel-Hamas war to fuel anti-Semitism, disinformation, and broader hate, including not just against us Jews, it's Muslims, Arab Americans, and others online, bigots, trolls, foreign influence campaigns, so sowing division, extreme voices on campus turning protests into platforms for bigotry, discrimination, and eliminationist rhetoric, and so much more. In other cases, we've seen politicians and other voices exploit our community's real pain and fear around anti-Semitism to advance broader extremist agendas, such as eliminating DEI altogether, defunding our education institutions altogether, or while railing against campus anti-Semitism as they should, also espousing dangerous anti-Semitic conspiracy theories on the other side of the mouth. And this is only going to become more urgent as we enter an election season when bigotry, conspiracy theories, and extremism of all stripes will surely be given bigger and more frequent platforms. So what does this tell us?
Yep, let's figure out.
Anti-Semitism doesn't exist in isolation. Rather, anti-Semitism and other forms of hate and extremism animate and feed each other in a constant feedback loop, with deadly consequences for all marginalized communities and for our democracy. But anti-Semitism generally isn't talked about this way. And as a result, the public conversation about our safety as Jews has been largely disconnected from conversations on democracy, on racism, and other forms of bigotry and extremism, and it's treated as a particular challenge for the Jewish community, despite its universal impacts on each and every person in this country. And so this has multiple implications. It prevents non-Jewish communities from understanding their own self-interest in fighting anti-Semitism at this existential moment. And at a time when we as Jews are already feeling isolated, abandoned, understandably so, it sometimes makes it harder for us to see broader democracy and civil rights work as fundamental to our own safety. And perhaps most importantly, it keeps our communities apart in a moment when cross-community solidarity has never been more urgent. The path forward is one rooted in building a shared understanding of how anti-Semitism functions as a tool to further broader hate, violence, and anti-democratic extremism, bringing together communities that are under threat in pursuit of solutions that advance an inclusive, pluralistic democracy where we are all safe. Now, some may argue that the aftermath of October 7th is proof of failure for this framework, that the isolation and abandonment we understandably feel right now means we should put up walls, give up on building bridges between communities in pursuit of Jewish safety and a more inclusive society. But for me, and I suspect for many of you as you're here, the aftermath of October 7th is proof of that a siloed, narrow approach to countering anti-Semitism is insufficient, and that we need deeper investment in a different approach. An approach that illustrates the interconnection of our safety as Jews with the safety of other communities and the future of our democracy. And this requires us to do the challenging work that you're about to go through right now, of community relations and government relations and coalition building, dispensing with the zero-sum frameworks and false binaries so often advanced by the loudest voices, and instead leaning into our relationships across communities, across lines of difference, to help allies and potential allies understand anti-Semitism and how its impact extends well beyond the Jewish community, animating and fueling that broader extremism and hate. And so too must we remember, as Jews, that our safety has been most assured in inclusive democracies where all communities are safe and free. History shows us over and over again that where extremism and authoritarianism thrive, anti-Semitism also flourishes. This is at the core of our work at the Jewish Council for Public Affairs. Just last week, we launched 2 new action networks focused on protecting and strengthening democracy, combating anti-Semitism, and deeply interconnected forms of hate and extremism. These action networks bring together national Jewish organizations, non-Jewish allies, as well as local Jewish community relations councils and other partners, including some right here in this room, enabling us to mobilize on the national and local levels in support of state and city legislative solutions, national legislation, civic engagement, education, advocacy, and so much more. And we're also working with 125 JCRCs and broader Jewish communities across the country to make the case to our neighbors on why the fight against anti-Semitism is inherent to the fight for other community safety and our democracy. Because the research tells us that message is most effective, and because our reality tells us it's existential right now. Ultimately, this is a fight that's going to be won on the state and local levels, and that means that the work that you're doing here together at JPAC can have an outsized role, especially right now. Engaging allies and partners, providing models for how other communities can navigate these challenges, and mobilizing together in support of the inclusive policies we need to protect Jews and all communities at this critical moment. Fighting anti-Semitism means fighting it in all its forms, wherever it shows up and rears its ugly head. If we're calling it anti-Semitism, we're calling it out everywhere, not just in one space, everywhere. Because Jewish safety depends on it, because our safety is inextricably linked with the safety and rights of each and every group, and with democracy itself. The fight to counter anti-Semitism is the fight for all communities' rights and safety and our democracy, and the fight for all communities' rights and safety and our democracy is the fight to counter anti-Semitism. This is a defining moment for the Jewish people, for all marginalized communities, and again, for our democracy. It requires us to reject those loud voices, those efforts to tear our communities apart from one another, and instead find a way to move towards each other and connect the dots between our safety and our futures. It's only by doing so that we can advance a future in which Jews and all people are truly safe and free. Thanks so much.